Today, we're going to talk about what's going on in the world today and with the horror of what's going on in the Ukraine. Somehow it's a repeat of what happened in Nazi Germany many, many years ago. The difference, however, is that we knew nothing about the suffering of millions back then, my parents and my sister Evelyn included. Today, however, what's happening in Ukraine, which is somewhat similar to what happened to Nazi Germany, hits us in the face day and night. You know, the question was asked, what is a Holocaust survivor? And most people think, oh, it's a Holocaust survivor who suffered in a concentration camp and managed to get out alive with tattoos on their own. That's not so. There's much more to a Holocaust survivor, much more. The true definition is that all Jews throughout Europe and elsewhere who were persecuted for just being Jewish were forced to leave their homes and their lives in order not to be killed. They were uprooted from their homes and families and loved ones and everything they knew to start a new life elsewhere. And a new life was a struggle in itself. You know, I am one of those who knew nothing about it. I was born here. My sister was born in Berlin, Germany, and where my parents were. But until Steven Spielberg in the mid-1980s produced a show or project in which my sister was interviewed and filmed, I knew nothing or very, very little of what my sister Evelyn and what my parents went through to escape and survive the Nazi Holocaust. Seeing that show or project was a revelation that sent me to bed for days. So today I'd like to share what I learned from that and what I've learned since then about what my sister and my parents went through, because nothing was ever talked about. It was hush, hush in my home and elsewhere. So I'd like to start interviewing my sister Evelyn, my older sister. She's 11 years older than me. I just want to clarify.
10 and a half.
She comes from Berlin, Germany, and she was a little girl there. And I'd like Evelyn to share with us, what was it like being a little girl in Berlin, Germany?
Such a long time ago, by the way. It's not 11 years, Bea. It's 10 and a half years that I'm older. How was my life in Germany? First of all, I was sheltered, not Bea and I, excuse me. I was brought up in a middle-class family. My father had a men's clothing store. We lived in a building that he owned. The store was downstairs, and we had a large apartment upstairs. I was lucky enough to have a nanny who happened to be the wife of one of my dad's salesmen. My mother used to help downstairs at the store with my father, and my nanny, and her name was Martha, took me all over. She took me to the beach. She took me to the park. I didn't have many friends because I was quite young. And then things changed. Unbeknownst to me, I never knew what, but everything, as Bea said, it became hush hush. Nobody talked. Whenever I started to ask questions, which a normal 5-year-old asks, I was told, shh, don't say anything. We're not talking about it. The picture just went out. Can you see me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
What was so sad, I was so excited about going to school. And I thought I would go to a regular school with all of the other children. But being Jewish, with Hitler in power, a Jewish child could not attend a regular school. I had to go to a Jewish school. And my father's employee, one of the employees, would walk me to school and pick me up after school. And if he was 1 minute late, I was very blonde as a child, and the little boys, I guess they were Hitler youths in uniform, would stand and taunt me while I waited for Hans to pick me up. And needless to say, it was a very traumatic thing. I used to be scared to death to go to school and come back. And then it all stopped. And I couldn't go to school anymore.
You know, Evelyn, a couple of things happened besides you not going to school anymore. Again, hush hush, you really didn't know what was happening. But you suspected certain things. Didn't you tell me one time you and mommy, who were upstairs above the store, something happened that was traumatic? Can you share that?
Yes. I try not to think about it because I still have nightmares about it. But being a 5-year-old, and I had nothing to do because I couldn't play with children, I couldn't be with anybody, I would sit on top of the steps and I would look down and watch the customers come in. And one day, some men in uniform came and they took suits and coats and jackets, and they had their arms full, and they started to walk out of the store. And my mother said, and one of the salesmen said, "You can't take that without paying." And they said, "Oh, yes, we can." And with that, hit my mother to the floor. And I remember sitting frozen on top of the steps, not being able to do anything, and seeing my mother lying on the floor. And to this day, when I think about it, it's very traumatic. But on a happier note, I forgot to say one thing, Bea. You talked about me as a child before Hitler, what it was. And I remember on Sundays, mommy and daddy would take me to a cafe. And it's funny, I forgot the name all these years. And when we talked, I remembered the name of the cafe was Dublin's. And we used to go, and a lot of elegant people were there dressed to the hilt. And they would have their coffee and pastry, and I would have my hot chocolate. And that was stopped right after Hitler came into power. No more Dublin's, no more friends, no more anything. I didn't even see my family.
You know, we have a very smart father who somehow managed to get out it started in 1933, Hitler, when all the changes started to take place with what you're describing. But he had I don't know how he had the brains to know what to get out. And then one day, as part of his plan, which you didn't know, and I have tears when you recall it, Daddy recalls this story. You were a little girl living in Berlin, and you were brought to Tante Zelma and Uncle Neublatt's house. I'm going to cry, with cousin Erica and Booby, whose name was Manfred. And you were going to stay there and have fun with your cousins. And then all of a sudden, they're going to the beach, and they said, "Avshin, you have to stay here." What was going on?
I think when my parents told me I was going to go by myself, which was a big thing, to stay with Tante Zelma and Uncle Neublatt and my cousins, I was elated. And we played and we went all over for about 5-6 days. And then that day, my aunt said to me, "We are going to the beach, but you can't come with us." And I said, "Why?" And they said, "Well, you're going to wait for your mommy and daddy, and they're going to pick you up." And I said, "But you can't leave me." I think I was 7 years old at the time. And I was afraid to be alone. And they said, "No, we have to leave." And I was so frightened when they left that I hid under the dining room table. Uh, Unfortunately, what I later found out, the reason they left me alone is Hitler, well, the SS actually spied on all families. And what they were afraid of, my parents were afraid of, that the SS would not only arrest them, but my aunt and uncle and family as well. So it was best to separate to stay safe. I didn't know this until many, many years later. And it was a very frightening experience again.
You know, and they were your daddy's plan at that time was to go to Czechoslovakia.
I have no idea. All I know is when they picked me up at Tante Zelma and Uncle Neublatt's house, they said, we're going to the beach. I said, oh, good. We're going to meet Tante Zelma and Uncle Neublatt and Manfred and Erika. And they said, yes. And we got on a train. And I said, that's not the train to go to the beach. And they said, yes, it is. And in Germany, you did what your parents asked. And they had said to me, you mustn't talk. You mustn't ask questions. And I did as I was told. But I remember wondering, why are we going on this train instead of the beach? And as we went on, as the train traveled, we stopped, I guess it was the border at the time, and some men came on in uniforms, and they're screaming, passport, passport, Stoller, Stoller. And my mother grabbed my hand, and I remember this as yesterday. And she said, don't talk. Whatever you do, don't say a word, don't cry, don't do anything. I think to this day, when I see a uniform, I'm not frightened, I fully understand it, but there's that same fear that is underlying with me anyway, that arises. I think in life, memories create triggers, and certain memories that you stash inside you and you don't remember, one thing reminds you of that. And somehow when I see a uniform as an adult, I fully understand it. But as a child, and you do revert back as a child, you get that horrible feeling. And I think that's what's left with not only myself, but with most Holocaust victims. I've been having meetings with quite a few, and they all say the same thing, that inner fear.
Yeah, Daddy was taking you across the border to Czechoslovakia because at that time he was allowed to get a summer visa for 3 months to go to Marienbad. Is that correct?
From what I found out as an adult, you don't know as a child, and Daddy would never talk. You know, he never spoke. And it wasn't until you insisted that you wanted to make a tape that he finally opened up. But getting back to your question, I didn't know we were going to Czechoslovakia. I didn't know we were going to Marienbad, which is a spa in Czechoslovakia. We used to go there every summer. And we went to Marienbad and everything was very happy. And the next thing, we're on a train going to Prague. Of course, as a child, I didn't know one place from another. All I know is I felt like a feather that was flying, and wherever the wind blew me, that's where I went. And being an obedient child, I never questioned it. And when we got to Prague, my parents said to me, we're going to put you in a wonderful place. We have to go to a hotel and we can't take care of you because we have very important business to do. Later on, I found out they spent all these months knocking on any embassy's door trying to get a visa, and they didn't care where they went. So they couldn't take care of me. And I was put into this home with other children, I guess like me, whose parents were fleeing and trying to escape to go anywhere, and it was horrible. Not only was the place horrible, but I felt as if my parents abandoned me. They didn't come often. And I think that's the one thing I suffer from, abandonment.
Yeah. You were abandoned a few times. You were abandoned when you were a happy child in Berlin, and then you no longer could see cousins, you no longer could see, and all around you was fear. We didn't talk about this episode, but I'd like to bring it up. Maybe you'd like to share it. First of all, I want to say we never talked about these things, Evelyn and I, till recently. One thing
Excuse me, I have to interrupt. Do you know why? We wanted to shelter you. I didn't want you to go through what I went through.
Yeah. And you know what's so interesting? You were a Holocaust survivor, but you weren't in a concentration camp. That's why the explanation of a Holocaust survivor is not just someone who was tortured in a concentration camp. It's all that Evelyn and my family went through to try to get the hell out of there. The boarding school, you felt abandoned and you were confused. Why did they leave me here? Where were they off dancing, having a good time? And they couldn't tell you. And even if they told you, what would you have understood? The feeling of abandonment has never left you, Evelyn. You still tear up a little bit about it. Then did they ever come to you finally and say, we're taking you out and we're going someplace? What was that all about?
Parents never told their children what they were going to do, for the simple reason that they didn't want their children to say anything and endanger the family. So everything was a secret and everything was hush hush. It was quiet for years and years, Bea, and I think you know this. I never thought of myself as a Holocaust survivor. I think things were so that I pushed everything inside. I wanted to assimilate. And when I met my husband, he was an American. He was in the World War II. He was wounded, a Yankee through and through. And I became an American in my thoughts, in my heart. I raised my children that way. My children never knew, really. They heard Grandpa had an accent, but they never really saw me as a European Holocaust survivor. I was an American. It wasn't until I think it was in the 80s that there was a television show called The Holocaust. And when I watched it, it was a series of, I think, 3 episodes or something. And it awakened something inside me. And I couldn't quite put it into place, but I had this very, very uneasy feeling. And I was teaching at the time. I taught kindergarten in Long Beach. And nobody knew what's a Holocaust here in America. I shouldn't say nobody, but a lot of people didn't know what's a Holocaust. And as teachers, our school district, which was quite progressive, thought it would be a good idea if teachers would be educated in Holocaust memories, history. And we had a lecturer, and she talked to us about her experiences. And I listened to her and I said, wait a minute, you're a Holocaust survivor. I have the same experiences as you, but I'm not a Holocaust survivor. And I went up to her after class and she said, come on, we're going to have coffee. And she told me the same thing as you said, Bea. All Jews that had to flee their country because they were Jews and they were being persecuted are Holocaust survivors. because we don't have numbers on our arms, but we have memories. And I think those feelings remain, especially if you're a child, for the rest of your life.
You know, at one point, mommy and daddy came to you after being in that wonderful place with all the other unhappy children and said to you, we're going someplace wonderful. We're going on a big ship and we're going to a place where there's gold in the streets. Tell us about that memory and what that felt like.
Well, again, the unknown. I was back with mommy and daddy, so I felt secure again. I thought they had left me forever. And we went on this huge ship. And when you're little, the ship is even larger in your mind than it actually is. And the voyage was a little rocky. And we came to America. And stupid me, I looked in the streets and there was no gold. So anyway, we went to an apartment in the Bronx, a distant relative of daddy's, and he kept us there for about 3 days. And unbelievably, daddy found an apartment and we moved into that apartment. And I think we were there about a week. And mommy said to me, you know, education is so very, very important, especially to Jewish people. I think I'm going to find out for you to go to school. And she took me to the school, PS 28 in the Bronx, and registered me. And the principal was quite sympathetic because I couldn't speak English. She spoke in broken Yiddish. And he decided to put me in a class with children that were much smaller than I. I was supposedly going into second or third grade. This was kindergarten. And he felt that the teacher spoke a little bit of German. She would be able to communicate with me. And that was a nightmare. I still had the clothes that I had from Germany because my mother didn't know how to shop here. And I wore high shoes. I wore a German type dress and my hair was very blonde. And here comes this big kid with little children in peculiar clothes, and they made fun of me. And you develop a lack of confidence. I felt rejected here. I was rejected in Germany as a Jew, and it was a very difficult time for me. But the teacher I had, and I still remember her name, it's Miss Haas, took me to her home for 2 weekends. And she said to me, you're an American. You're in America now. And you have to be like other people. And you have to speak English. And I'm going to show you how you don't speak with an accent. I didn't know what an accent was at the time. But she worked with me and she made me feel that now I was in a safe place, but I have to speak the same way as other people do. And to this day, people say to me, oh, you come from Germany, you don't have an accent. Well, I was lucky. I overcame it.
You certainly did. People are shocked when they hear about your background, including myself. Now, you're in America, you're in an apartment in the Bronx. Daddy is out trying to make a living, which we'll talk about in a moment, how he did that. And you were lonely and you kept begging mommy and daddy for something special. And they came through. What was that? She's gonna cry, I'm gonna cry.
Me too. I was lonely. I felt abandoned again, that same feeling. And I begged mommy and daddy, I would love a little sister or brother or somebody in my family. We had no family. I think that's the one thing that Holocaust survivors miss more than anything else, a family, because all of our family was murdered. I know, you know, B, both mommy and daddy's family. My daddy's family was in Warsaw. They went to a ghetto first, and as an entire family, they were gassed. Same thing with mommy's family. Uh, Maybe one or two sisters were able to escape, uh, but it's lonely. And but what happened was my wish came true. Mommy became pregnant, and I got a little sister. And I'll never forget when mommy was giving birth in the hospital, daddy smuggled me in the back of the hospital. He said, children aren't supposed to be there, but I want you to see your sister. And I saw you. And it was the greatest moment of my life. Now we fight, but that's okay. I still love you.
I still love you too. And you know, this is so important to talk about because so many things went on in their life. That was my parents and sisters that I knew nothing about because you don't talk about those things.
Right.
You know, and I really marvel at my sister at age, how are you, 93 and a half? 93 and a half, can we say? She's such a strong person. And I think that you have to go through something like she went through in order to say, I can make it, I can do it, I can be strong. So I really, even though we fight a lot, I admire her so very much. But I also, Evelyn, admire, which we'll talk about quickly and then we'll wrap it up, our father. How the hell did he know? Because he made a good living. He had a home, he had a business, and everyone, and he said, I want to leave Germany.
Left everything.
And his friend said, Jack, you're crazy. Look at the life you have. This will pass. I guess they said it about certain presidents in this country too, but we won't go there. And I remember you telling me many years after that you would travel to Holland with mommy when you were a little girl. And you went to visit what was aunt and uncle, even though they weren't.
Montescovsky.
And you would have chocolate sprinkles on your toast. But you didn't know at that time why you were going once a month with mommy. Why were you traveling from Berlin to Holland?
From about 1935, and I know the dates now because I looked everything up chronologically to trace my life and put it all back into one piece. Mommy and I traveled to The Hague to this one couple, and I thought they were my aunt and uncle. Their name was Uncle Abt and Tante Lutz Montescovsky. It wasn't until my husband and I went back many, many years after the war, and they were still alive. I looked them up and they said, come and see us. And they were living in an apartment. And the first thing Tante Lutz said to me, look, we have central heating. They lived underground for 5 years. A non-Jewish accountant hid them. The reason we used to travel there, unbeknownst to me, they told me, Daddy never told me, that mommy and I would go there and smuggle money, and they would deposit money in accounts so Jewish people, when they were able to get out of wherever, whether it was Poland or Germany or Czechoslovakia, wherever, money would be there for them so they could get the money in a free country. At that time, Holland wasn't occupied yet, and we would be able to go wherever we wanted to. And that was Daddy's genius. But there was a grapevine of information. I think that all Jews talked to each other. There were many Jews that were able to get out. Unfortunately, only those with money were able to. It hurts me to say it, but it's a fact of life. And those who felt,
Money
oh,
talks.
what's going to happen to
You
me,
need the money.
they perished and they never made it. In 89, the wall was still up in Berlin, and my husband and I were invited back by the West German government as window dressing. And we went back, and there we found a new generation of Germans. And many times people from all over the world say, oh, all Germans are no good. I disagree with that. This was a different generation. When we were in Berlin, more was done for the Jewish cause than I saw what was happening here. In the middle of the Kordam, which is like our Broadway in New York, there was a huge sign and said, we nicht vergessen. And it listed all of the concentration camps with the numbers that were murdered. The Germans kept very good records. We went to the Reichstag, which was where Hitler made all of his speeches, and they turned it into a museum. And there, they had lists of the concentration camps with the names of the people that were murdered. It was unbelievable. And I recommend that everybody goes to see the Washington Jewish Memorial Museum for the Holocaust, which really shows exactly what happened in all of Europe. And unfortunately, we just haven't changed. We haven't learned a lesson.
Evelyn, this was wonderful that you were willing to share this, because we've talked a lot and cried a lot, and I'm going to cry. I'm very proud of you that you had the guts to share this with our Hadassah sisters.